Good morning or good afternoon if you're joining us from Europe. My name is Toby Heaps. I'm the CEO and editor-in-chief of Corporate Knights, and it's my pleasure to welcome you here today. Before we get underway, I'm just going to do a brief land acknowledgement. Corporate Knights honors the people and land of all First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people, and their valuable past and present contributions to this land. For all the attendees, I invite you to introduce yourself in the chat, and really glad you can join us here today for the Carbon Reduction 20 story. This project came out of an editorial brainstorm. We were trying to figure out what would be one single metric we would want to be able to measure companies on over 10 years to find out where the most progress was made. And of course, with climate change being such an existential issue, we honed in on emissions. We considered scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions, but because historically you can't really get a good data set for scope 3 emissions, that's the emissions of the products and services, apart from the direct emissions that companies have at their smokestacks and related to electricity consumption, which is scope 1 and 2. We decided to focus on where the good data was, the scope 1 and 2. And so we wanted to look across all the major sectors that have a big climate footprint and will be relevant to getting us to the church on time relative to achieving the Paris Agreement targets. And so we looked at the same sectors we look at for the Earth Index project, where we measure countries to see if they're going as fast as they said they're going to go to reduce their emissions. And we looked at companies, and we looked at just a really simple metric. We looked at their emissions from 10 years ago and their emissions today, and who had made the biggest cuts. And when we first started this, we thought we were going to find a lot of examples of companies that were real heroes, that were going all in on the climate transition, retiring, cutting out, making more efficient all their polluting activities, and then investing all of their money or most of their money into expanding climate solutions and going for it. And the reality was a little bit different. There was all sorts of stories, whether it's the oil and gas sector, that's more sort of just selling off some of their assets to other interests, or in manufacturing industries where you see a lot of efficiency measures. But the real stars that we found were in the power sector. And again, there was different stories from different companies. Some were ramping up nuclear, some were going into natural gas, and we didn't actually count it if the majority of emissions reductions came from natural gas, because we know from the best peer-reviewed research that when you do the life cycle emissions of natural gas and you count the leaks, which are not counted on the formal reports, it can be as bad or sometimes worse than coal on an emissions basis. And so we went through all this, and what we found when it was all said and done was something that was pretty inspiring. We found that the world's biggest polluters, some of the world's biggest polluters in every industry, could move fast and furious at speed and scale and dramatically reduce their emissions inside of a 10-year period, in the order of almost cutting them in half, 43% reduction in emissions over 10 years by the 20 companies that we were looking at. And so that's the speed and scale that the whole world needs to move at if we're going to have a chance at delivering on our Paris targets. And I think it's really inspiring that some of the world's biggest polluters have already done this and showed us that this is possible. Because if they can do it, anybody can. And I'm really happy to have with us today Salvatore, who's the CEO of Enel Green Energy, because when I said we were looking for real heroes and stars, one of the heroes and stars that popped out of this research, where we looked at 6,500 companies over 10 years, the one that popped out and jumped off the page is just an amazing story on so many levels, was Enel. And so Naomi Buck, who's one of our top future writers, to deep dive into Enel and has a really beautiful story to share. And so I'll end there and look forward to the questions. Thanks for joining today.
Thank you, Toby. Well, it's as Toby said, it really is an inspiring story. I have to admit that when I was asked to profile this company, I didn't know a whole lot about it. And now I do, and it is truly inspiring, especially given what we're hearing out of Europe on the energy front these days, much of which is very alarming and really regressive in climate terms. Enel's story is the absolute opposite. Enel, pardon my Italian, it stands for Ente Nazionale per l'Energia Elettrica. It was founded in 1962 as Italy's state-owned electricity company, privatized in the 1990s and has subsequently gone global. It operates in more than 30 countries. It runs the largest electrical distribution network in the world. It is Europe's largest utility and the second largest power company in the world. Enel started working towards decarbonization quite early on. In 1993, it built what was at the time the largest photovoltaic plant in Europe. And by the early 2000s was already setting itself quite ambitious emission reduction targets. But what Enel has accomplished in the last decade is truly remarkable. The company has cut its scope 1 and 2 emissions by 73 million tons, which in absolute terms is the greatest reduction of any company in the world. In the last 6 years alone, Enel has closed over 40 of its 50 coal plants, and it intends to have exited coal entirely by 2027. It's aiming for net zero across all its operations by 2040. And to this end, it has invested heavily in renewables, which now make up 49% of its total generation capacity. The cherry on top of all this is the impact that this transition has had on the company's bottom line. Since 2012, Enel has more than doubled its market value, and it has increased its revenues by 38%. Our guest, Salvatore Bernabei, joined Enel in 1999. He has a background in engineering management and has worked for Enel in logistics, supply chain management positions across Europe, Latin and South America before being named the CEO of Enel Green Power and Thermal Generation in 2020. Enel Green Power is the Enel subsidiary, which is devoted to renewables. It operates over 1,200 plants in 21 countries, solar, wind, hydro, geothermal, a little bit of biomass, and now getting into some green hydrogen. In total, Enel Green Power manages 55 gigawatts of renewable capacity. And to put that in perspective, Enbridge, Canada's largest power company, is currently managing just over 2 gigawatts of renewable capacity. So this makes Enel Green Power the largest renewable energy company in the world at this moment. So Salvatore, good morning.
Good morning, Naomi.
Yes. I wanted to start with a general question. You've been with Enel for some 20 years, and in that time, you've seen the company go from one that is dealing primarily in fossil fuels to one that is dealing primarily in renewables. It's an amazing transition. What do you consider the main driving force behind it to have been?
Yes, good morning to everyone. I've been so privileged in having the opportunity to work at Enel since 1999. And I had the privilege to see the energy transition happening whilst working within this company. So I had also the opportunity to see how the company changed. And it was not since the early 2000s. It was more or less in 2014 that the company understood that a different direction should be undertaken. And it coincided with Francesco Starrace, new CEO of Enel in 2014, assuming this role, that he clearly had the vision of a company that had to be decarbonized. What our company understood before than others is the fact that the renewables will be the future, and purely based on economical concept that, respect to other technologies, the renewables had at that time a superior and higher possibility of cost reduction. They were not cost competitive all the world at that time. In some countries already were cost competitive, in some others not. But the fact that they were already competitive in some countries made us understand that they could be like a wave arriving all over the world. And the fact that in the technology, there would be such big space for improvement made us understand that it was just a matter of time. So if I have to say what was the most important driver was this leadership, this vision, clearly vision, that then resulted in a very simple strategy based on decarbonization and electrification. So here the concept was, due to the fact that the renewables are becoming more and more competitive versus other fossil fuel technology, we will see more renewables installed. Being more competitive, the cost of energy will go down, and this would make possible higher electrification. So decarbonization is strictly linked to electrification, that by the end is a very important, effective way to use energy compared to other sources. So that was the main driver. Then obviously, the regulatory framework of some countries versus others also accelerate this pace of growth, but the main driver was this inspirational vision.
Okay, maybe you could just explain to the audience what the relationship is between Enel Green Power and its parent company, Enel. Enel Green was established in 2008.
Yes.
How does it relate to?
Yeah.
Yep, go ahead.
And Enel is an utility who operates in the field of energy generation, distribution, trading, and also what we call beyond commodity, that has to do about e-mobility or other kind of services like demand response, etc. So Enel Green Power is the arm of the Enel Group who deals about renewables, and that is pursuing this decarbonization mission. So just to give you an idea, in the latest 7 years, at the same time that we were shutting down coal plants, and we closed something like 9.5 gigawatt of coal plants, we installed in the same period 22 gigawatt of renewables. This gives you an idea of the transition, because you have to give an alternative to the coal generation. In our case, it was renewables, but each megawatt of coal should be replaced by more than 1 megawatt of renewables, because the load factor is lower in case of renewables. So 9 versus 22, this is just the beginning of the journey. And just to give you an idea, our target at 2030 is to have 85% of our generation CO2 free. Today, we are at 58%. So 58% is already CO2 free, and we will reach 82. So thanks to this 22 gigawatt of additional generation and closing a 9.5 gigawatt of coal, we already jumped to 58, but the journey is just half of it. So we will have to reach 85 in 8 years, and then more in the following years. Our final goal is to exit also from the gas business at 2040. So we have this intermediate milestone of closing all the coal plants by 2025 and the gas plants by 2040. This gives you also an idea about what the transition is. So it's something, it's a process, it's a journey. You cannot do it 1 year, you cannot do it in 2 years, but what is important, I would like to highlight, is having clear the direction. So no compromise on the direction. There could be volatility in this journey, but the direction should be very clear.
So when the coal closures are a huge part of this, and closing a coal plant is a painful process, or it can be locally in terms of the impact on a local community and employment. There's often huge pushback. Can you explain how Enel has managed those closures and the impact it has had on local employment?
Yeah, so far we have closed tens of plants, both coal and oil and gas. We have already started closing oil and gas. In particular, with the coal plants, we have already closed 9 of them, corresponding to this 9.5 gigawatt. But overall, plus the oil and gas, we reach tens of them. And each time that you close such kind of plants, they are typically big plants. It is a process that has to be managed carefully, because there is a lot of interest around this territory. There is a local community. There are jobs that are strictly related to the operation of these plants. So whatever kind of process like this one should be planned, managed locally per time. In some cases, we also asked to the system operator to close plants, and our request was rejected. Because apart from the interest of the territory, then there is the interest of the system itself. So you should create the alternative before allowing a certain company to shut down a plant like this one, because these are very big plants. So unless you have an alternative, that could be, in case of coal, a gas-fired plant or a sufficient amount of renewable plus storage, it's hard to get a permit from the system operator. So my point is that you have to work per time, having clear this path, this direction, with the local community and also with the system operators. And this is something that requires years. So typically what we do is to speak with the mayor, to speak with the trade unions, to speak with the contractors and tell them, look, this is what would happen. This is what would happen in the next 5 to 10 years. Sooner or later, it could be in 3 years, in 4 years, in 5, but it would happen. So we say to the contractors, as I am a so big company working different fields, it is not the ending the world when we will close the factory, provided that you reskill your people. We could involve you in other business that we are running at the same time and that will boom, like the e-mobility, like the grids business, like the renewables. So we gave the possibility to the contractors to reskill and upskill their people. We did the same with our people working on these plants. And we also spoke with the system operator saying, look, this could be the alternatives for this plant. We work with them, reinforcing the grid, creating alternatives. And when we close a plant, is because then we have already created the condition to make it just and affordable for the system. So theoretically, it's hard, but if you approach per time with the right approach also, that is dialogue with the different stakeholders, it can be done. No doubt about it. We are doing it.
Yes, you said that in fact at some of the coal plants you've closed, employment has risen. So
yes.
Is that, and that is due to the employment decommissioning, which involves a lot of people, but also transitioning those former coal plant employees into a renewable economy.
Yes, it's correct. Look, there are different studies made by, for instance, International Energy Agency or university like the Oxford University that says that renewables create more jobs than fossil fuels. What we do is experimenting and observing if this is true in the reality. And we have some example now. We have been working in this energy transition for 7 years now. I would like to mention a specific case. By the way, exactly this week, we have received the good news. We had a plant in Spain called Teruel. It was a big coal plant that we already closed some years ago. What the local Spanish government did was a tender to tell to everyone where this plant was, there is a connection to the network anyway. And we make available this connection to the company that will propose the better project in terms of energy transition. So we presented our project that envisaged a new hub of generation based on wind plus solar PV plus battery energy storage plus green hydrogen generation, plus a lot of activities on the territory to help people to, let's say, valorize the local context that was especially based on tourism and agriculture. So we were able, for instance, to start again some activities that had been abandoned some years ago in the field of agriculture. For instance, through the agrivoltaic, that is a new form of doing solar PV, or by planting trees of olive oil, that was an activity that had been abandoned. We also partnered with third companies to establish factories for the manufacturing of trackers that are particular components that are used then in the solar PV plants. And by doing this social project or industrial project, acting as a catalyzer, attracting interest of local entrepreneurs or people, we were able to create at the end more jobs than before. And this week we received the news that the entirely capacity of 1,200 megawatt have been awarded to us, because our project has been selected among the more than 10 projects presented as the best one in terms of sustainability for the territory. So is once more an evidence about the fact that can be done a just transition that also increase the jobs.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to switch now to natural gas, which is something you are getting away with. Getting away from, and an ambition to be completely without involving no natural gas in your generation by 2040. You mentioned your CEO, Francesco Starace, in the context of leadership. he has been very outspoken in his criticism of Europe's reliance on natural gas. And he's also called the use of natural gas for electricity generation stupid, inefficient and stupid. But Enel at the moment is considering converting at least one of its coal plants to natural gas, and is also considering reopening your LNG terminal in Sicily. That would seem to be a contradiction. Maybe you can explain.
Yes, it is not correct what you said. So thank you for the opportunity to clarify.
Okay.
So from one end, consider that we have the 9 plants that we closed, and 3 of them that we sold simply because we exit the country. So it is not a decision of selling an asset, but it was a strategic decision to abandon a country. So in total, we are not operating anymore 12 coal plants. Okay, so 9 of these were our decision to close them, remaining in the same countries. And we will close other 9 in the next years. If I consider the 9 plants already closed, in no one case we are converting into gas these coal plants. In no case. We will reconvert and repurpose the plants with the hub of the generation of the future. The concept is similar to the one of Teruel I mentioned before. PV plus wind plus hydrogen plus battery energy storage plus local initiatives for local entrepreneurs. So factories to manufacture trackers or hydroponic warehouses, some other initiative, in some cases also tourist resorts, etc. Speaking to the 9 plants we have to close yet, in one case, so at the end will be one case out of 18, we will convert to gas, one of this plant. And this is a decision that has been taken some years ago because of the energy transition. I said we cannot say that from one day to the other we abandon gas. That's why we defined the 2025 for coal, but for gas, not Enel, the system, we envisage that the system will need gas for more years. So in this context, or relying on the gas for a longer period, you have to understand this decision to convert from coal to gas. When we started working, we would have imagined a higher rate of conversion from coal to gas. We had project for all of the plants we closed to reconvert to gas, but then we said that this is stupid. This will not be needed in all this big amount. So just focus on this, the very minimal needed from the system. And let's repurpose with a different use the others. So this one case that you mentioned has to be understood in this context. And for what concerns the LNG terminal, looks, LNG is something that, in my opinion, you see in Europe in this moment, what is the situation? So leveraging on LNG is a need in the short time, just because Europe is not receiving gas from the pipes anymore. And at Enel, we had this project that had been developed more than 10 years ago. It's a very old project. They got all the permission, but we never built it because also there was no need of this project in Italy. So today we have this project, and if someone thinks that the project will be useful for the systems, the project is there, but Enel will not build any LNG project because the direction is very clear, as I told you. So we are trying to do the minimal needed, but being coherent with our vision of decarbonization. So we didn't take any decision investing in the LNG project.
Okay, well, thank you for the clarification.
Naomi, do you mind? I just had a quick follow-up.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so Salvatore, many people in the power sector and the oil and gas sector still, and even in the investment sector, still think that natural gas, even new natural gas, and keeping natural gas for a while it's going to be necessary, and it would be irresponsible to get rid of it because the intermittency of renewables. And they point out that when you measure the smokestack emissions, and I won't use the term natural gas, I think fossil gas is more correct. When you use fossil gas to generate power at the smokestack, it's much more efficient than coal at the smokestack. And yet, even though you know there's just one plant out of a gazillion other projects that you guys have that's being built, you're winding down the gas, and your view and Enel's view on gas seems to be at sort of more of an extreme end of what conventional wisdom would be, say in the power sector and the oil and gas sector, about the importance of fossil gas. And I was just wondering, why are you guys less bullish on fossil gas is part of the energy mix than the conventional wisdom is right now?
But the question is why we are not more bullish.
Yeah.
This is your question.
Yeah.
But what do you mean with being more bullish?
Well, you seem to be, when we look at other major power companies,
Yeah.
they're still building a fair bit of gas. They're not making statements as absolute as Enel is about disassociating themselves from gas. And so just wondering what gives you what's the rationale, or what's the basis for Enel's desire to just disassociate from fossil gas?
Okay, simply because we think that although it will be a long-term journey, in 20 years more or less, the introduction of renewables plus storage systems will be sufficient to tell goodbye to the fossil fuel assets, also the ones fueled by gas. But it's 20 years from now. And if we observe what has been installed in terms of renewables so far, we have no doubt that it will happen. So that's why we are so bullish, as we say. Look, whatever forecast in terms of installation of new capacity of renewables have been over-exceeded, whatever forecast. Also this year, in spite of the world energy crisis, in spite of all the difficulty that the world is having, in 2022, we are forecasting that there will be installed more PV solar plants than any other previous world, more than 220 gigawatts worldwide. People also understood, also starting from the lesson learned from this crisis, that at the end, a PV module is like a portable plant. It's a portable plant because you can plug and play, you can install on your balcony at home, for instance, connect to the grid, and it produces energy. So in this particular moment where we are speaking, we are requesting, we and other companies, a lot of requests from people to have installed rooftop PV at home, but there are no sufficient capacity to manufacture all these modules. So I have no doubt that in 20 years from now, the gas plants will not have a role in the energy mix. Also because the storage will develop, because renewables alone could not replace gas, but renewables coupled with the long duration storage would have a role. And as Enel, we are already installing a lot of battery energy systems worldwide. If you look to our growth, the growth on renewables has been impressed, but what is happening now in storage is also more impressed. And if you look to the future, whatever agency gives you a forecast of growth that is 3 times the one of the storage system, 3 times bigger than the renewables. So what is happening in the reality is that once more we are over-exceeding this forecast. And this makes me and make us understand at Enel that in 20 years, there will be a chance, more than a chance to replace. So it's like observing the reality. I can tell you that when I go when I travel and I speak also with important stakeholders, and I tell them what we are doing also in terms of storage systems, most of the time they are surprised and they tell me, are the storage system competitive today? We didn't know. Our consultant told us that we will have to wait 5 years. And we say, look, perhaps if starting from 2021, the first company started to realize this. And perhaps you should hurry up and being the first mover if you want to also to create higher value. So I think that it would happen, but based on the observation, to be honest, not on dreams.
So maybe we could turn for a moment to the financials. As I mentioned in the introduction, the company has done extremely well through this transition, both in terms of its market value and its its revenues. Maybe you could talk a little bit about the impact that your decarbonization drive has had on your financing costs and your investor base.
Yes, at Enel, we used to refer to sustainability as value. And also our CFO is the main sponsor of this approach. And listening to a CFO speaking about sustainability value is impactful. And at the end, also our colleague from finance understood that this is a reality, it's not just a motto, it's not a slogan. We have 60% of our debt that is sustainable. It means that the instruments that we used to raise this debt is a sustainable based instrument. And when I refer to sustainable, I refer, for instance, to the sustainability linked bond that are a particular kind of bonds that don't refer to a particular project like the green bond. They refer to the strategy of a company. So we took a commitment towards these bondholders, telling them, look, I commit to decarbonize the entire company, not to make one project. So I commit to have a certain share of renewables out of the total installed capacity of X% in a certain year and Z% after some other years. So what I'm telling you that I would implement a sustainable strategy that will result in CO2 reduction. And they said, okay, this is a new concept of sustainability bond. And what happens if you don't comply? Okay, I would raise the cost that I have to pay, the interest rate, the yield that you have to pay to you. So they said, okay, let's go and let's see what happens. And this approach gave us the possibility to raise debt at a lower cost with lower commission. By the way, we are reaching our targets. Okay, so they will achieve the yield without the premium because we were able to do what we said. We were able to walk the talk. But the indirect way, the indirect result of this approach was that we were able to reduce the cost of issuing all this bond. So we showed that sustainability is also financial value. It's not just working to have a better life in the planet. Because, you know, value has several dimensions. One is money, but there are some other dimensions that are not money. So we also demonstrate that sustainability is money at the end of the day. For the same reason that we are applying circular economy in our project. Circular also is a way to make better our planet, right? But what companies are not understanding yet is that it's also a way to make money. Because when you say, for instance, that you collect a module at the end of the useful life, you collect the model, and instead of sending it to landfill, you process it to collect aluminum, silver, copper, and to use again in the process. If you make the business case, at the end, this would be better. You will be hedged versus the fluctuation, the volatility of the commodities, and you will have a lower price to build or to buy the new module. So these are the initiatives we are launching. And at the end, when one investor decide to buy a sustainability bond, also share this kind of way to proceed that really creates value. So they say, look, this company has a lower risk compared to others, it's more sustainable, it's more resilient. So for me, it's fine to have a lower return compared to others because it's more stable, it's more sure. Now, this is the reasoning.
I see. Toby, shall we turn to his questions from the chat at this point? I see some are coming in. There is a question here about green hydrogen. What is Enel doing in that area, and how do you see the development of green hydrogen in the next 5 years?
Look, I would like to take again what you said at the beginning, that our CEO said in a certain interview that burning gas is stupid. Mm-hmm. We also have to consider that burning hydrogen could be stupid if we burn it for the wrong uses. Mm-hmm. At that moment, we already produce hydrogen, 70 million tons per year. And this is produced mainly by this process called steam reforming, so by gas. And is produced to be used in particular uses like chemical companies or manufacturing or producing or production of fertilizers, or in the chemical industry in general, or in the fields that needs heat at high temperature. So our approach is that, first of all, we have to replace this gray hydrogen with green one. And then, as it is a very precious resource, the green hydrogen, we should use in the so-called hard-to-abate sector. So an hard-to-abate sector is the production of fertilizers, is the production of steel, is the shipping, or these are the sectors. If you tell me, look, let's use hydrogen for fueling the cars, we have a better solution than hydrogen, that are the electrical cars, that are 3 times more efficient. If you have 1 kilowatt hours of electricity and you use it to drive a car, you will drive 3 times more distance compared to using these kilowatt hours of electricity to produce hydrogen and to use them in hydrogen car. So from the thermodynamic point of view, the electrical use of any car is better than an hydrogen-fueled car. So we say the hydrogen should be green, first of all, otherwise we will increase the CO2 emission. And then, as it is a precious resource, let's use only when it's strictly needed. So hard to abate, it's very simple. And let's start from replacing what is already gray. So we will do some activities, we're already doing activities in order to promote the concept of green hydrogen with this approach. And our main task at the moment is to make competitive the green hydrogen, because today is not. So all of our effort are addressed to make the cost decrease. So we are partnering with startups, innovating company, to discover what will be the technology of the future at the end of the day, that will give us the possibility to do this leapfrog, okay?
How about the same question relating to storage? What do you think the most promising developments, or what are you looking forward to in storage in the coming 5 years or so?
In terms of technologies, you mean?
Yes.
Most promising technology. Look,
yeah.
Today, the lithium batteries are a reality. And also because, I mean, in the car industry, that is the bigger users of batteries, today, the lithium batteries are the more convenient. So we have a sort of free riding effect. This field developed because the immobility and the costs went down. So also installing battery energy storage based on lithium technology today is the more convenient. In the latest capacity auction, we participated in Italy, for instance. We offered lithium batteries to the system to provide capacity to the systems, so power. And we were more competitive than the gas plant. It has been the first year where it occurred. In the auction maintained 2 years ago, there were no batteries offered, and some gas plants were awarded. But this year, we presented like 1.8 gigawatt of batteries, and we were awarded with this big quantity. So instead of gas plants, will be installed batteries in the next 2 years in Italy. It's just an example to how the maturity, the technology is evolving, and the fact that they are mature, commercial mature today. But looking to the future, we are also following different technologies. First of all, because the lithium technology gives you an autonomy of maximum 8 hours. And in order to replace one day the gas, we need the long duration systems. So days, not hours. So we have already new pilots project in construction, experimenting different chemistries of batteries that last more than 10 hours until 16 hours, and different kind of storage, like the gravitational storage. So the technologies are different also considering from what you need to do. So more hours are needed in the systems. You can go with the different technology, different from lithium. If you need a quick response to the system to stabilize the grid, today you need the millisecond answer to the system. So the lithium battery are the most competitive today. In 2-3 years, perhaps it will change, because what we are observing is that the technology is evolving very fast.
Let's talk a bit about your suppliers and how you communicate your own ambitions to your suppliers. How do you make clear to them what it is you're trying to achieve and bring them on board?
Thanks for this question, because the decarbonization is a challenge that has to be shared by all the participants here at the game. The fact that as Enel we are going into this direction will not be sufficient unless we are able to involve all the ecosystems. I used to refer to what is the responsibility and the possibility to impact with this example. As Enel, we buy each year goods, services, works for a total of for an amount that corresponds to 1% GDP of a country like Italy. This is what we buy, we purchase every year, 1% of the corresponding GDP of Italy. We made the calculation. All of our suppliers and the sub-suppliers of tier 1, 2, 3, how much they purchase each year, all the integrated value chain of Enel. And the result is astonishing. 32% of Italian GDP. So there is a multiplier effect from 1 to 32. So if we are able to engage our suppliers and in turn their sub-suppliers in the decarbonization journey, we could reach a huge impact. And if all the company bigger like us do the same, we could multiply the effect. So we started negotiating on a different approach. Starting since 6 years now, we started telling to our suppliers, look, this is a must for me. So I'm able to consider in the evaluation of your products, supply, services, not only the price, but also the sustainability of your value proposition. And we introduced a special mechanism called the K mechanism, where we introduce some K of sustainability. So for instance, I tell to my suppliers, if you have to deliver a service to me, you can use, for instance, fueled gas cars on electrical cars. If you commit to use electrical cars, I give you a discount of 5% compared to the competitor who will use electrical fossil fuel cars. And by doing so, we create an incentive also for them to be more sustainable. We used to introduce this K for 2-3 years just to create the change, and then we make mandatory the requirements. So we give them time to change, because once more, whatever transition needs time, cannot be done in 1 year. But after a while, we say, look, now it's mandatory if you want to work with me to have electrical cars, and so on. So we are doing an effort to involve the supply chain because we realize that the multiplier effect is really huge. And as we say that we need action, we have to act urgently, blah, 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 blah. This is a clever way to reach that goal, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. How about the more tenacious scope 3 emissions from, for instance, from steel and cement?
Yes, I mean, when we refer to scope 3, this is strictly linked to what I said before. When we approach a certain supply, we don't purchase or source directly steel, okay? But we work with suppliers that source steel. So these incentives that we are creating to them are in turn make pressure on the suppliers of steel to decarbonize. Because when they go and they say, look, I have a customer who requires green steel, for instance, and the steel manufacturer are forced to change something. So we are trying to approach the tier 2, 3, 4, the supply chain that way, and it is working.
Good. We have a question about disposal of and recovery or reuse of materials used in batteries being used for storage. How is Enel dealing with those?
Yes, this is part of what we call the circular economy. Now, this is a correct question that we have to ask to ourselves, but also the same question could be asked for the modules, for the turbines, etc. We are partnering with different startups to create a business model to collect the batteries and then recycle them. But apart from that, we are doing also other things. The batteries could be collected and let's say recycled, extracting the main components, the raw materials, or could be reused. Do you know what we did 2 years ago? And we started receiving the first result this year. We spoke with the car manufacturer and we said, look, what would happen when the batteries of the cars you are selling will reach the final useful life? And they said that we are disposing them. Okay, we said, look, let's try to do the following. You will give me these batteries. I will install this battery in one of my power plants running today and connect to the grid. And I will experiment the behaviors of these batteries connected to the grid to see in parallel if the performance in the generation business of this cluster of second life batteries compared to a cluster of new manufactured batteries is different. And what is the difference in terms of performance? So we discovered that in the case of generation, for the services that we have to give to the grid, the batteries that are not good to provide certain performances to the car drivers are good to perform services for the grids. They have a similar behaviors of the new batteries. So this is a way to extend the life of the batteries. So you know, who one would have thought to do that at the beginning? But if one starts saying the problem are batteries because then you have to dispose, the modules are a battery because you have to dispose, we will not have any ideas, any innovation. So our approach is to work hard on circular economy because we project and design our plants circular by design. We collaborate through an open innovation approach with startups and companies that wants to partner with us to create new way to do things. That could be collecting, recycling, reusing, etc., etc. So I think that these are challenges. Yes, but we have all the capability, not Enel, I mean, humankind, we have all the capability to face the challenges, provided you work with the right approach, the right vision per time.
So here, there's a question here about the impact that your decarbonization has had on the price of power. Is electricity that's being generated the way you're doing it now more or less expensive for consumers than it was, say, 10 years ago?
Look, today in Europe, unfortunately, we are experimenting an increase of price because of what's happening on the gas. Mm-hmm. And this was an effect already present before the war started, but then was amplified by the war, unfortunately. And because of the market design is based on the marginal price approach, unfortunately, the price of electricity is going up. We think that this situation should make us accelerate in the installation of renewables. And in order to make this understand to people, we said, what would have happened if we would have installed more megawatt of renewables in this past? So if we would have anticipated of 10 years, what we call the National Plan for Energy, that says that we should install a certain quantity of renewables by 2025, 2030. If we would have done this 10 years before, what would be the impact on the energy bills today? And the result is 30% lower. So it's another way to say that we have to hurry up in developing renewables, no matter what's happening on the gas. Because at the end, this is clearly more competitive. And as soon as we accelerate, as soon as we could provide lower cost for the electricity to the system. Mm-hmm. Together, we should have perhaps review the market design, because at the end, if you have a system based on marginal price, but with a higher stake of renewables, also with the marginal price systems, we will have achieved the 30% less cost. Without the marginal price, even more. So I think that the data are quite clear. It's just a way of going and doing it. This is what we are doing, and we think other companies should do the same.
So that feeds very nicely into a question that's been asked, which is, you, Enel, are an electricity generation and distribution company. What would you say to other types of companies that are apprehensive about starting to make the kind of changes that you have? What point would you make to them based on your own experience? offers some wisdom or encouragement to companies that are reluctant to take this kind of a leap?
Look, giving suggestion to third parties is difficult. So I can just say that going through this transition journey was also hard for us, because as you can imagine, we also had to incur in heavy write-off in our balance sheet. This year, for instance, we closed a coal plants in Chile that entered into operation 5 years ago. So the useful life of this plant is at least 40 years, and we closed after 5 years. So we had to go through very big write-off. But whatever write-off in 5 years from now will be even bigger. So it's better to close now than wait more. And this is quite obvious for us. So undertaking the journey of decarbonization and doing it, in my opinion, no doubt, is convenient for the companies who is doing it and for the system. It goes from, let's say, winning internal resistance that each company can have. Because when you have been working in a certain business that is quite stable for a long time, the culture of the company is quite different to change in a few years. And my point is that we also had to go under a change of mentality within Enel. It was not easy to manage internally, but clearly we worked with our team. Someone left also the company because the no believers in the energy transition, as we wanted to do, also left the company. But the vast majority believed it from the beginning, or at the end realized that this was the good approach. But a considerable effort had to be done also in terms of change management, work on the culture of the company to face the challenges, because there are challenges, but my message also is that we can do it. It's not impossible.
Well, along the same line, what would you say will be the role of oil companies in the future? They are trying to rebrand themselves as sustainable and clean, but the investments they're making in renewables are pale in comparison to what you are doing. And the future doesn't look as rosy for them. So what do you think the role of oil and gas will be?
I have noticed that all of them already started to invest also in renewables. Mm-hmm. Not sure what they are doing in terms of other investment connected to the fossil fuel, but they start investing in renewables. So I think that they understood what we discovered some years ago, that is valuable and also convenient for them to do that. There could be a difference in terms of how long this journey will last. They could have a different vision. I noticed personally that some of them are accelerating more, some other are just observing, trying to maintain a lower pace. But I understand that they have realized that they have to go into this direction. So as you can imagine, they have a big investment done in some other assets, or they could be stranded in a short time. So I understand that they have this internal difficulty to understand where to invest, what to do. And at the same time, I think that within this company, there are some parts that I've already clear what is direction, some other that are saying, no, perhaps let's wait more, but they will go sooner or later into this direction, because sooner or later, we will not need gas anymore, like we are already saying in some part of the world, because when we say that we are shutting down coal is in Europe mainly. We are doing also in Latin America, but as you know perfectly, some other part of the world, that is the majority of CO2 emission, are not targeting the shutdown of coal in the next 5 to 10 years. I refer to Asia, for instance. So I understand that this is very difficult to get everyone aligned and on board, but I think that they have already understood. It's just a matter of time, and there will be a certain moment where they will accelerate. Mm-hmm. In decarbonization, in decarbonizing, I refer, they will accelerate.
So there's one job about the quality of living provided to people working in the renewable sector versus those who formerly worked in the coal industry. How can you compare the standard of living of within the renewable energy economy with that of the coal economy?
I don't know what exactly the question want to refers to with the quality of living. I mean, if you go and see what are the competencies needed in the renewables, you will find some jobs that are very similar to the one used in the core industry or in the oil industries. Just to give you an example, yesterday I visited one of the oil and gas plants that we closed. It was a 3,600 megawatt that we closed. And we partnered with a company that used to manufacture steel, structure of steel for the erection of the boilers of the oil and gas or coal plants. And the same people now will start manufacturing trackers to install PV modules. So the job is different, but it's the same field, working in steel structures. They will install a factory, new one, in the plants that we are closed. So their quality of life will be the same. They used to work on that area, doing some kind of structures. They will do different structures in the same field, working with the same steel, but to do different things. So if I have to base an answer on my experience, I'm not seeing disruption there. We will also need the engineers or peoples that will have to optimize the functioning of the renewables or the batteries. So we are already using artificial intelligence. So we will need these companies that are different from manufacturing. So we will need steel anymore. So we will need this kind of industry. So I don't know exactly the person who asked the question, what wants to mean, but I don't see disruptions here in the quality of life at the end of the day, sincerely.
Well, that's a positive note to end on. And I think we are drawing to a close as we reach the hour mark. Thank you very much for your time and your very robust answers to our questions. I'll pass it back to Toby.
Well, thanks, Naomi, and thanks, Salvatore, and thanks everyone who joined us. We just had a really special 1 hour with Salvatore, who runs the largest green power generation business on the planet. And as we know, as goes the power sector, will go the climate. And so it's really inspiring to see that an incumbent, when the conventional wisdom says the pace of change is usually set by the challenger, not the incumbent. Here's an example of the largest power company in the Western world moving rapidly and over the last 6-7 years, and even speeding up faster now with all of the challenges that we're seeing with the situation with Russia and Ukraine, which is playing chaos in the energy markets and with power companies. Up until that point, though, Enel had over the course of the decarbonization journey doubled its market value, and as the whole market's come down, it's come down a little bit, but with its revenue base up substantially from before it started the decarbonization, Enel is showing that this is possible. It is possible for the huge companies to move fast, even faster than they thought was possible, and for good things to come in terms of jobs and market value and revenues. And I think one of the big myths that was busted today was at the beginning. A lot of people still think that renewable energy is more expensive and less reliable than fossil energy. And what's interesting, what Salvatore shared with us is, we know the formula for decarbonization. We have to decarbonize electricity and electrify everything. But people often see the tension because they think if we decarbonize electricity, it will get more expensive, the yellow jackets will come out, and then things will stop. But what Salvatore shared with us is the opposite. The faster you decarbonize, the cheaper is electricity, and the faster you can move to electrify everything. So I think that's a really inspiring note. And it's great to have such a huge example. And there'll be many challengers in the wake, but it's great to see that incumbents who have been around for many years can also reinvent themselves. And so thank you everyone for joining us today. This is recorded, will be on YouTube. And thank you, Salvatore, and your colleagues for leading this charge. And please read Naomi's beautiful story at corporatenights.com. Thanks a lot and have a great week. Take care.
Thanks to you, Toby and Naomi, for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Ciao.
Thank you. Ciao.